Hello everybody, Chris Teal here, director of the second annual Fayetteville Jazz Festival. Just popping in right before the next workshop just to give a reminder. Check down in the description of this video. There are lots of opportunities to help out not only this festival through donations, but also get yourself involved playing music and also supporting scholarships for our Institute for Creative Music virtual summer camp that is still happening. We're going to do this with a combination of pre-recorded videos that the IfCM has been doing for quite a while, but new content, of course, for the summer campers at a variety of different levels, and a lot of live interactive workshops, kind of in lieu of doing jazz combos. We're going to have sectionals, all kinds of stuff. And so check out the description of all the things that are going on as we go forward after you enjoy all of these videos from the Fayetteville Jazz Festival. Very excited to be able to present all the way from Fayetteville, Arkansas, the Jazz Area Coordinator at the University of Arkansas and a fantastic guitarist and educator, as you're about to see. Please enjoy Jake Hertzog.
Hello everyone, my name is Jake Hertzog and I'm the Jazz Area Coordinator at the University of Arkansas. We are so glad that you're participating in this, and thank you so much to Professor Teal for making this all happen. In this video, I'm going to talk about several things specifically related to jazz guitar that may help you in your journey. The first is the idea of approach notes. So when we have the chords to a jazz song, each of these chords that are usually composed of 3 or 4 or 5 notes, if they have 4 notes, we usually call these seventh chords, because that chord will have some kind of a root note, some kind of a third, some kind of a fifth, and some kind of a seventh. Much of the chromaticism that we hear in early jazz and bebop jazz is based on the idea of approach notes, and this comes from classical music. So if I play a D minor chord, D minor 7, my notes are D, F, A, and C. I can think of this also as the root note, the third, the fifth, and the seventh. So I'm going to demonstrate 7 different kinds of approach note patterns that will work on any type of chord as long as you understand the underlying concept behind it. So the first approach note sequence is we take those 4 chord tones and we play 1 half step below each of those chord tones. So C sharp to D, E to F, G sharp to A, and B to C. So if you're playing along, we can play them like this. 1, 2, 3. Call that the half step below. The second category of approach notes comes from above the note that we're looking for. So we're going to play a scale tone above the note that is the chord tone. So what scale tone? How do we get the scale tone? It depends on the quality of the harmony. So here we have a D minor chord, and we're going to take our scale tones from the Dorian scale, which is, in this case, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. Another way to imagine that is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. So when we take the scale tone above our D, our root note, we get E. When we take the scale tone above our third, our F, we get G. When we take the scale tone above our fifth, A, A, we get B. And when we take the scale tone above our 7th, C, we actually get D an octave above. So now we have a scale tone pattern that we can play in the same way as we did the half step below. 1, 2, 3. The next two approach note patterns, we're actually going to combine the half step below and the scale tone above. So if we put the half step below first and the scale tone above second, and then our chord tone. So in every case, we will have to the root note, to the third, to the fifth, and to the seventh. So if we play our pattern like that, 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to take that and just play it backwards. Scale tone above, half step below. So in each case, it will be 1, 2, 3. Now we have a special case. The next kind of approach note is based on the idea that that scale tone above is a whole step. And this will become important later. If we notice in the case of the D minor 7th chord that is attached to the Dorian scale, here's the Dorian scale, each one of our each one of our scale tone above is actually a whole step. D to E, G to F, B to A, and D to C. That means that there's a potential chromatic note in between that whole step. So for example, E, E flat, D, G, G flat, F, B, B flat, A, and D, D flat, C. So we will call this the double chromatic above. So the double chromatic above means we have one chromatic note, two chromatic notes to each chord tone. So if we put those together in our pattern, we get this. 1, 2, 3. Now we can combine the half step below and the double chromatic above. Essentially, this gives us 3 chromatic notes that surround each chord tone. So once again, our chord tones, now we're going to have the half step below, double chromatic above, half step below, double chromatic above, half step below, double chromatic above, and half step below, double chromatic above. So now the exercise goes like this. 1, 2, 3. following along, just like we did with the half step below, scale tone above, we can reverse it. So we can play the double chromatic first, and then this half step below. So if we do that for each of our chord tones, if we put all of those patterns together, we end up with 7. Half step below, scale tone above, the combinations of half step below and scale tone above, and now double chromatic, and then the 2 combinations of half step below and double chromatic above. So now we're going to play each of those in sequence. So beginning with the half step below. So 1, 2, 3. Scale tone above. Step below. And reverse it. From here, we can now extrapolate this pattern to different chord types. So in this lesson, I want to mostly concentrate on major 7, minor 7, and dominant 7. And there's a couple of short, tricky things to pay attention to when we take this pattern from major 7 in dominant 7 and minor 7. So with our minor 7, if we had now the, let's say, the 5 chord in this key, G dominant 7, we can take the same approach. So our chord tones in this case will be G, B, D, F. Once again, we have 1, 3, 5, and 7. If we play the half step below, we can now play the scale tone above, but we have to be careful here because we're in a different scale. Before we had the D Dorian scale. Now we have a G Mixolydian scale. Which means that our scale tones above will be A to G, C to B, E to D, and G to F. Now this has an implication for what those double chromatics are going to be. So first we combine the half step and scale tone. Now when we play chromatics, we can only do that when the scale tone above is a whole step. So in this case, we can do it with G. We can't do it with B because our scale tone above is actually a half step. So we have to leave that one out. With D, we can play it because our scale tone above is a whole step. And our scale tone above F is also a whole step. Which means when we add the half step below, we only have those three combinations. To the fifth, to the seventh, and the reverse. Let's examine this very quickly for the C major 7th chord. Once again, we have 1, 3, 5, 7. So the half step below each chord tone will be like this. The scale tone above, this time we're in a Ionian scale or major scale. So our scale tones above will be D to C, F to E, A to G, C to B. So our combinations will be play through the double chromatics, we can play that on the root note, C. Can't do it on the third because we don't have that whole step scale tone. On the fifth we can play it. But now for the major 7th chord, a scale tone above that 7th is a half step. It's not a whole step, so we can't have the double chromatic there. So in this case, the double chromatic combinations are only going to be on the root note and the 5th. So, as will those combinations with the half step below. So the exercise would be to focus on the 2-5-1 progression, since there's so much use of the 2-5-1 progression in jazz, that we can take each of those 7 approach note patterns and play it through the sequence of the 2-5-1. So if we play the half step below, we get this. If we play our scale tone above, we get this. Of the double chromatics. So remember, we have on the D minor chord, we can play the double chromatic on all 4 notes. On the G7 chord, we can play the double chromatic from the root, from the 5th, and from the 7th. And on the 1 major chord, we can play the double chromatic only on the root and on the 5th. So here we go. combinations with the half step below, we have to reflect the double chromatics that are missing. Half step below, double chromatic above. And for the sake of thoroughness, reverse it. Don't have it. And then finally, and this is indicative of the chromaticism that we hear so much in swing and bebop, and a little bit moving into the post-bebop periods. The next concept we want to talk about is related to voice leading for the 2-5-1 progression. So just as we had with the approach notes, because this is such a commonly used progression, the deeper understanding of the voice leading we can have, the better off we're going to be, especially for comping instruments like guitar, piano, and vibraphone. So let's start with the very basic idea of building this voice leading in 3 pieces. The root notes on the bottom, the guide tones in the middle. The guide tones give us the quality of the chord. Major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, half diminished, diminished, etc. And then the upper extensions on the top. That's 9, 11s, 13s, etc. So on the guitar, and you can do this on the piano, and if you don't play a harmonic instrument, you can play these one line at a time. So first, we're going to play the root notes. And I like to give all my examples in the key of C because that's the easiest key to transpose. So this will be all in concert C. So first, we should play the root notes. D, G, C. That's going on underneath everything else, and everything else is going to give those root notes the color and the quality. If we first play the thirds and sevenths, which jazz musicians like to refer to as the guide tones, then we will hear that minor 7 and dominant 7 and major 7. So for example, the third of the D minor chord is F, and the 7th of the D minor chord is C. Now, if you don't play a harmonic instrument, just go ahead and play these one line at a time, one note at a time. So when we go to the G7, the 7th of the chord is F, and the third of the chord is B natural. When we go to the C major 7 chord, the 7th of the chord is E, and the third of the chord is E, and the 7th of the chord is B natural. So what happens is we get a little suspension type of motion between these. So if I play the guide tones, 3rd and 7th of the D minor 7, and then I play the guide tones of the G7, and then I play the guide tones of the C major 7. Can your ears follow along that shifting line? Now let's hear it with the root notes D, G, C back in. So if you don't play a harmonic instrument, play only the top line, the 7th, going to the 3rd, and then remaining as the 7th. And then play that 3rd, resolving to the third, the seventh, and then resolving to the third. So once again we have now the next layer above that becomes the chord quality. So the chord I'm going to take that over, Chris. Above that becomes the chord color, the upper extensions that we add on and you see sometimes in jazz sheet music like 9, 11, 13, or variations like sharp 9, sharp 11, or flat 13. So how do we get these colors? First, let's understand where they come from. Going back to our D minor 7 example that we began with, if we play up that Dorian scale and we give a number to each note, including the octave, let's see what happens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, usually we start over at 1, but let's extrapolate that we're going above the octave here. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We don't really have to go any higher than that because then we would get to 14, 15, or 7, 1 again. That gives us the numeral system for where those upper extensions come from. And really, if we were to transpose those all into the same octave, they just become the 3 notes in the scale that are not the chord tones in our 7th chord. So we would have 1, 9, 3, 11, 5, 13, 7, 1. So if I want to include those into my voicing, into my chord, then I need to be able to find a way to play some of those extra notes in addition to playing root note and those guide tones. So this leads us into the subject of voice leading on guitar specifically that can be applied to other instruments and to non-polyphonic instruments. So to understand this a little better, let's add some upper extensions onto the chord. Now, these forms, there's a great many forms and characterizations and qualities of chords that can be played on the guitar. I like to take a page from the rock and roll playbook and call these the jazz power chords. So if you think about rock and roll, these are the power chords. Power chords in rock and roll are just 1, 5. In jazz, the power chord is 1, 3, and 7. And that can be major, can be dominant, can be minor, could be diminished. Based on that, we can see that if we put the root note on the A string or E string, we have some ability to play 3rd and 7th on the next adjacent string. So for example, D, F, C. Now that's our power chord. Notice that I still have 2 strings unused above it, and I still have at least 1 finger unused. What that means is I can add some of the upper structure quality and color notes into this chord. So, for example, I want to add a 9th, which is the E. I know this because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 1, 9, the 2nd degree of the Dorian scale. So, if I play my jazz power chord, well, the 9th is going to be right here. And that gives us the familiar minor 9th chord that we have seen and heard so many times in the voicing that is very guitar specific. Now, I know the 9th is here. I can change the quality of that chord. I can make it a major 9th. I can make it a dominant 9th. I can make it a minor 9th. One really, really excellent trick to remember on the guitar specifically is that if the ninth is on the B string, then you know that a flat 9 and a sharp 9, which are altered extensions, are only 1/2 step away. So if I have a dominant ninth chord, there's my ninth. If I want to make that into a flat 9, it's as easy as lowering that note by 1/2 step. If I want to make that into a sharp 9, it's as easy as raising that note by 1/2 step. Now, if we extrapolate that into the G7 chord, here's my jazz power chord, G, F, B, or G, B, F. That's a little low, so we can reverse those. Let's say I wanted to add another note onto that chord. Let's say I wanted to add the ninth onto that chord as well. Well, that's going to be easily reachable because G is here, and just like in my scale, Mixolydian scale this time, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, or 1, 2. Here's the ninth on the G chord. Now I have a G ninth. And you'll notice something really interesting. There's not a note being played on the B string. Just as earlier, I didn't have a note being played on the A string. So let's back up to the D minor chord and explore that a little further. Say, for example, I wanted to add another note onto that minor chord. Let's say I wanted to add the next extension, which would be the 11th. So that would be, I could think about that as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or simply as the 4th degree of that D Dorian scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that brings me to G natural. Can I reach a G natural chord from here? If I bar that a little bit, absolutely. Now I have a rich minor chord with a 9th and an 11th. And I'm using all of those strings. If I continue this line of thought and I get to my G chord that had a 9th in it, let's say I want to add another note there. 11th is a weird note for a dominant chord, and if you have a chance to further study in the altered dominant category, which hopefully you will, either through this event or something else, you'll find all sorts of uses for sharp 11s. But today I'm going to add the 13th, which is a natural extension of that Mixolydian dominant scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, or the 6th degree in the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. E natural. Why do I want to add this into the chord? Because it's a rich extension, and from the perspective of the guitar, it's right under my finger. If I'm going to play this 9th, then I can easily play the 13th underneath. Now I have a rich dominant 13th chord sound that has a 9th in it as well. So here's my D minor with the 11th. Here's my G dominant with the 13th. So this brings us back to the geometry of how the guitar is laid out. Because of the tuning, if the 9th is on the B string, flat 9 and sharp 9 will be right there, and the 11th, sharp 11, 5th, sharp 5th, and 13th will be on the E string. In the case of our G7, if the 9th is on the A string, on the E string, then the flat 9 and sharp 9 will be right there, and the 13th, flat 13th, 5th, sharp 11, and natural 11 will be be on the B string. So what we get is a reverse. In each case, we get to use those upper extensions, and they're reachable based on where the root note is and where the upper extensions are. So this is a way of thinking about chord voicings on the guitar that clearly positions the root note on the bottom, those guide tones in the middle, third and seventh, and the upper extensions on top, specifically on the top two strings. And it gives us a relationship to understand if we know where the ninth is. Let's say I have a dominant chord with a ninth. If I want to understand where the sharp 11 is, I know that it will be here. So this is a way of thinking about chords that is inherently additive, meaning that we take our bass note, we add the guide tones, we add extensions, and we end up with a 4 or 5, or even in some cases a 6-note chord that gives us a rich explanation of the harmony. A second way of thinking about the voice leading on the guitar is by simply paring down 4-part voicings. So this is the second most common way to conceive jazz chord, 7th chord voicings on the guitar. So let's take a look at this a little bit more closely. If we have a C major 7th chord, so if you're sitting near a piano or if you have access to a piano, if you play C, E, G, and B, you get a chord that sounds like this. More specifically, we can think of that as 1, 3, 5, 7. Now, piano players and guitar players, here's where we differ. A piano player can usually reach combinations of notes that are close together. For example, C, D, and E blink like this. On the guitar, those kinds of voicings are usually quite difficult because the guitar is tuned in fourths. What does that mean? It means that notes that are adjacent to each other, like half steps, can be hard to reach. So when we're thinking about chord voicings on the guitar, what we need to do is be able to transpose different notes around so that the chord is easier to play. And I can demonstrate this by showing the inversions of a C major 7th chord. If I want to play a C major 7th chord, 1, 3, 5, 7, I can play this. But when I search for the next inversion, now I get into trouble because suddenly I have to play E, G, B, and this C up here, which is not usually a very reachable chord. Or, for example, I have to play G, B, C, E up there, or B, C, E, G. So, as you can see, it takes me 2 hands to awkwardly tap these chords, and that means that I'm not going to be able to play them very easily. So, what is the solution? We're going to expand the voicing, and in so doing, we're going to take the second note from the top, in this case, C, E, G, B. We're going to take that second note, G, and we're going to put that note down an octave. It will come here. So we're going to be left with a chord that is G, C, E, B. Because we have transposed that second note from the top of the original voicing down by 1 octave, we will call this a drop 2 type voicing. So drop 2 type voicings are fantastic on the guitar because they are very playable given the way that standard tuning works. So if I did that for all 4 of those impossible chords, that second note down an octave, I get this. If I take this one, if I put that second note down an octave, I get this. And finally, if I take this one, and I take that second note down, I'm going to get this. What does this give me? This gives me C major 7, C, E, G, B, and it gives me 4 very playable voicings, where before I only really had 1. Why is this important? Because as guitar players, we need to have command of these 4-part voicings, and that means that we need to be able to play any 4-note chord in any possible inversion. So once again, if you're following along, we have if you don't play a harmonic instrument, these make really good arpeggios. And those are a nice complement to the closed voicing arpeggios that you are probably more accustomed to. So the drop 2 concept becomes very important on guitar because then we can put those together. So going back to the theme of the day, which is 2-5-1s, if I put a D minor 7th chord and a G 7th chord and a C major 7th chord together in these drop 2 categories, I can get many different combinations. For example, because each of those chords will have 4 different voicings. For example, D minor 7 can be here, 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 and here. And G7 can be here, 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 here. And that C major that we already discussed can be in those 4 places. We can voice lead any of those to any other one to get variety and texture. So, for example, some simple voice leading going down, we could play D minor 7 voiced F, C, D, A, G7 voiced F, B, D, G, and C major 7 voiced E, B, C, G. Let's do another one going down. We'll start from this D minor to this G7 to this C major. We can play this one going down. Or we can play this one going down. If this seems like a lot of information, then just focus on learning and remembering one voicing at a time, or one chord, all inversions at a time. It takes a while to become comfortable and fluent at putting these sets of chords together, just in the same way that it takes a while to become comfortable and fluent in a new language. The most important thing to realize that we're doing is we are voice leading those minor chords into the dominant chord, into the 1 chord. So in each of those examples, you will hear those same guide tone patterns that we had discussed earlier. The only difference being that the location of those guide tones in the chord is going to move around a little bit. For example, this one. Now those guide tones are on top. Hear it again. The final thing to take away from today is a little exercise in relationship to the comping styles. So jazz has been around a long time, and like any kind of art, it has evolved in spectacular fashion to produce all sorts of substyles, like Latin jazz, like fusion, like bebop, like swing, like modal jazz. And so we want to have, especially as guitar players and accompaniment instruments, we want to have some basic ideas of the way that the role of the instrument functions in some of those different jazz substyles. So the two most common roles of the guitar are to either function more as a constant rhythm instrument or to function more as a comping rhythm instrument. So let's just demonstrate those very briefly, because these are some of the roles that the guitar will be playing in the ensembles that you have a chance to perform in. So in terms of a continuous rhythm instrument, in the early era, before electricity, when guitars were primarily acoustic, they often had trouble being loud enough to become a solo instrument. The classic acoustic guitar, that is the American iteration of the acoustic guitar, was very much conceived as an accompaniment instrument. So in the days of early jazz, guitar players were playing an accompaniment role in a constant rhythm fashion, in the similar way that we would play that role in country western music or bluegrass music or the folk music of the time. So the most common example of this that you'll hear the guitar playing this role is on recordings like Oscar Peterson and Count Basie, where the guitar is playing essentially a constant rhythm quarter notes role, something very much like this. What's going on there? I'm playing quarter notes, and if you've been paying attention, I'm playing those jazz power chords, the roots, thirds, and sevenths of simple chord progressions such as 1, 6, 2, 5. Some guitar players include the root note in those voicings in this style, and some do not. If you just played the guide tones, it would still be effective in the context of an ensemble. If I add the root in, so in this situation, the guitar is not playing a necessarily reactive role as we see in later styles, more contemporary styles. The guitar is playing a role very much akin to the upright bass or the ride cymbal in terms of laying down a consistent rhythmic texture upon which any other layer of the ensemble and the arrangement can be constructed. In the second style to emulate is a more classic accompaniment style in which the guitar, instead of playing a strict constant rhythmic role, the guitar is going to be playing more of an accompaniment role that is reacting to the soloist, the melody, the rest of the ensemble. In this kind of situation, the drop 2 chords or the upper extensions of those jazz power chords can be very, very effective. So just to take that 1, 6, 2, 5 progression again, now I'm going to play that all using the 4-part drop 2 chords, but with a more rhythmical feel. So 1, 2, 3, play. that's a way to mix the drop 2 chords. If I use the jazz power chords and add those extensions, it becomes a little bit of a summary of everything we've discussed today. Or in more of a swing. Now I'm mixing and matching a little bit freely between those drop 2 voicings and the extended jazz power chords. So those two styles, the constant rhythm style, which is very often associated with musicians like Freddie Green in the Count Basie Orchestra, and the more flowing accompaniment, reactive type style associated with really a very wide range of musicians from Jim Hall up to contemporary players, is going to be the two kinds of things you want to spend the most time practicing, because as a guitarist in the jazz idiom, that's what you are going to be expected to do and generate. So a very brief synopsis of what we've covered today, and thank you very much for your time and your attention. We've covered the 7 approach notes to a 2-5-1 progression. We've covered the concept of jazz power chords and how to build up a voicing from the root and the guide tones and the upper extensions. And we've covered the idea of the drop 2 chords, which is an entire system of thinking about chord voicings that applies very well to guitar, but applies very well in other situations too, such as composition and arranging. And finally, we looked at 2 different styles that are common in the jazz guitar world in an accompaniment role: the continuous rhythm Freddie Green type of style, and the more involved, more harmonically rich accompaniment style such as Jim Hall and Kenny Burrell and Wes Montgomery. Once again, thank you so very much for paying attention, and I'm so glad that you all have the opportunity to be a part of this. Wishing everyone the very best, happy jazz practicing and playing, and I look forward to getting a chance to see you all again soon.